The Galactic Council chamber pulsed with the faint hum of ancient machinery, its towering walls adorned with shimmering holograms of countless star systems. Representatives from every major species sat in a crescent formation, their forms ranging from towering insectoids to gelatinous beings that glowed softly in the dim light. At the center of this grand assembly, Exarchrovix, a predator-like creature with serrated spines along his back, leaned forward, his amber eyes narrowing as he spoke. "The humans are an infestation," he growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. "They spread too quickly, building alliances, advancing their technology at an alarming rate. They speak of peace, but I see their true nature. Manipulators, conquerors in waiting." The room buzzed with murmurs, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging doubtful glances. "They're clever, yes," chimed in a serpentine delegate with scales that shimmered like liquid metal. "But they are soft. They rely too much on words and diplomacy. Their diplomats are nothing more than polite masks for their weakness." As the discussion grew heated, the chamber doors opened with a low hiss, and all eyes turned toward the figure entering. Adrian Kane, humanity's chosen representative to the Galactic Council, strode into the room with an unhurried grace. He was unassuming at first glance, neatly combed dark hair, sharp but plain features, and a tailored suit that clung to his athletic frame. Yet there was something about him, an aura that silenced the murmurs and commanded attention. His dark eyes scanned the room, calm and calculating, as if he already knew what each delegate thought of him. "Exarchrovix," Kane said with a faint smile, his voice smooth and even. "I couldn't help but overhear. I hope I haven't interrupted a lively discussion about humanity's faults." The Exarch bared his sharp teeth in what could only be described as a predatory grin. "Not faults, Kane. Merely observations. We were debating whether your species has earned its place among us, or if you're merely riding the coattails of mercy." The room tensed, awaiting Kane's response. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering the insult, then nodded. "It's only natural to question the unknown," he replied, his tone measured but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Humanity is still new to the stars compared to the rest of you. We've had to adapt quickly, sometimes more quickly than others might find comfortable. But adaptability is not a flaw. It's a strength." Kravix chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made several smaller delegates flinch. "Strength? We shall see. Words alone are not strength, Kane. Actions speak louder." Kane didn't flinch. He met the Exarch's gaze steadily, but something flickered behind his calm exterior, a shadow of a man far more dangerous than he appeared. The session adjourned shortly after, but the tension lingered in the air. As Kane exited the chamber, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on his back, some curious, others hostile. He walked with purpose, his stride unwavering, but his mind was already calculating the moves he'd need to make. In the shadowed recesses of the Council's private chambers, Kravix gathered his closest allies. "He's a threat," the Exarch hissed. "A well-disguised one, but a threat nonetheless. The humans are bold, sending a representative like him. I can smell it, the confidence, the arrogance. He's hiding something." A reptilian advisor slithered forward. "What do you propose, Exarch?" Kravix's spines bristled. "Elimination. Quiet, clean. He won't live to see another sunrise." The room fell silent. Even among Kravix's supporters, there was a faint unease. Assassinating a diplomat within the Council's walls was a dangerous gamble. But Kravix's ambition outweighed caution. "Contact the Umbral Consortium," he ordered. "Their mercenaries are unmatched. If Kane truly is a threat, let's see how he handles the galaxy's deadliest killers." Meanwhile, Kane returned to his quarters, a modest yet meticulously arranged room aboard the Council's orbital station. He removed his jacket, revealing the faint outline of concealed weapons holstered beneath his shirt. Sitting at his desk, he activated a secure terminal, its holographic interface glowing softly. A voice crackled through the encrypted channel. "Adrian, everything on track?" It was a woman's voice, sharp and professional. Back on Earth, she was part of the shadowy branch of humanity's intelligence network that had sent Kane into the lion's den. "They're making their move," Kane replied, his voice devoid of the diplomatic warmth he wore in the council chamber. Here, he was cold, methodical. Kravix won't be able to resist. He's too predictable. Do you need backup? Kane's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile, though it held no humor. No, let them come. It'll save me the trouble of hunting them down later. For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then the voice replied, understood. Stay safe, Baba Yaga. Kane's expression darkened at the mention of the name, but he didn't respond. The channel closed, and he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Memories surfaced. Memories of a time before he became a diplomat, when his hands were stained with the blood of those who had underestimated humanity. The nickname Baba Yaga had followed him from the dark corners of Earth's wars, whispered by enemies who never lived to see another day. To the Galactic Council, he was a diplomat. To those who knew the truth, he was a ghost, a predator who struck without warning and left nothing but devastation in his wake. Kane closed his eyes, letting the silence of his quarters settle around him. He didn't need to prepare for what was coming. He had been preparing his entire life. In the depths of the station, Kravix's hired killers gathered, their forms cloaked in shadows. They came from different species, each an apex predator in their own right. Blades gleamed under dim lights, and the air buzzed with the hum of energy weapons. The leader, a towering insectoid with razor-sharp mandibles, spoke in a voice that clicked and hissed. The target is alone in his quarters. We move now. No witnesses. As they slipped into the corridors, silent and lethal, Kane opened his eyes. The faintest of smiles tugged at his lips. Let's see how loud your actions really are, Exarch, he murmured. The storm was coming, and Kane was ready to meet it head-on. The faint hum of the station's power systems was the only sound in the dimly lit corridors as the assassins moved with practiced precision. They were shadows, their movements synchronized and silent. Leading them was Xeris, a hulking insectoid with glistening chitin and claws sharp enough to slice through reinforced steel. Behind him, a squad of specialists followed, each deadly in their own right. Cloaking devices shimmered faintly, distorting their forms as they approached their target. Adrian Kane's quarters were quiet. The door slid open without resistance, overridden by the team's advanced hacking tools. Inside, the room was dark, the faint glow of the station's starscape the only illumination. Xeris signaled to his team, mandibles clicking in silent commands. They fanned out, weapons drawn, scanning every corner of the room. But the space was empty. A sharp sound, a faint metallic click, echoed behind them. Xeris turned, his compound eyes narrowing. The door to the room slid shut, sealing them inside. For a moment, the team froze, their instincts honed through countless missions telling them something was wrong. From the shadows, Adrian Kane's voice emerged, calm and cold. You should have knocked. Before they could react, the lights flared to life, blinding them momentarily. Kane moved like a phantom, his silhouette darting between them. The first mercenary, a lithe, serpentine figure armed with a plasma blade, lunged toward the sound of his voice. Kane sidestepped with precision, his movements almost too fast to follow. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the alien's wrist, twisted it, and drove the blade into its chest. The others reacted instantly, firing energy bolts and projectiles in all directions. Kane was already moving, using the chaos to his advantage. A compact device in his hand emitted a burst of electromagnetic energy, disabling their cloaking systems and scrambling their comms. Xeris roared, his claws slashing through the air, but Kane was relentless. He vaulted over the insectoid, landing behind him, and drove an electrified baton into the base of his neck. Xeris convulsed, collapsing to the ground, but not before lashing out with a claw that grazed Kane's side. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, but Kane barely registered it. His focus was absolute, his mind calculating every move with ruthless efficiency. He ducked as another mercenary fired a projectile, the shot narrowly missing his head and embedding itself into the wall. Kane grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it with precision, striking the alien in the face and knocking it unconscious. The remaining mercenaries hesitated. Their confidence, so unshakable moments ago, was now fractured. This wasn't a man they were fighting. It was something else entirely. "Is this the best Kravix could muster?" Kane said, his voice echoing in the room. There was no mockery in his tone, only a cold, detached observation. One of the assassins, a hulking brute with 4 arms, roared in defiance and charged. Kane didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the distance faster than the alien expected. He ducked under a wild swing, delivering a brutal strike to the creature's ribs. As it stumbled, he grabbed its arm, twisted it, and slammed the alien into the ground with a force that left it motionless. Zirez struggled to his feet, his mandibles clicking furiously. "You're no diplomat." Kane turned to him, blood staining his shirt where the claw had grazed him. His expression was devoid of emotion, his dark eyes cold and unyielding. "No," he said simply. "I'm humanity's insurance policy." Zirez snarled and lunged again, his claws slicing through the air. Kane met him head-on, their movements a blur of strikes and counterstrikes. The insectoid's strength was overwhelming, but Kane's precision and speed were unmatched. He ducked under a claw, delivered a devastating elbow to Zirez's throat, and followed it with a knee to the abdomen. Zirez staggered, but Kane didn't let up. He grabbed the mercenary by the head, slamming it into the wall with a sickening crack. Zirez crumpled to the floor, his body twitching. The room fell silent. Kane stood amidst the carnage, his breathing steady despite the exertion. The assassins lay scattered around him, some unconscious, others groaning in pain. He walked to the door, placing a hand on the control panel. With a few swift commands, the lock disengaged, and the door slid open. Outside, a squad of Galactic Council security officers stood, their weapons drawn. Kane stepped into the corridor, his expression unreadable. "You might want to call a cleanup crew," he said calmly. The lead officer, a nervous-looking avian, glanced past Kane into the room, his eyes widening at the sight of the incapacitated mercenaries. "What would happen in there?" "They underestimated me," Kane replied, brushing past the officer. "I suggest you take them into custody. They'll have some interesting things to say about XR Kravix." As he walked away, the officers scrambled to secure the scene, their voices a mixture of confusion and alarm. Kane's pace was steady, his thoughts already moving ahead to the next step. He knew this wouldn't be the end. Kravix wouldn't give up so easily, and the council would be in turmoil after what had just occurred. But Kane wasn't concerned. He had faced worse odds before and survived. As he entered the lift to return to his quarters, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The wound on his side throbbed, a reminder that even he wasn't invincible. But pain was an old companion, one he had long since learned to live with. The lift doors closed, and Kane leaned against the wall, staring at his reflection in the polished surface. The face that stared back was calm, composed, but he knew the truth. Beneath the veneer of diplomacy and professionalism lay something far more dangerous. Baba Yaga, he murmured to himself, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. It was a title he hadn't wanted, but it had been earned nonetheless. To his enemies, it was a warning. To him, it was a reminder of what he was capable of. The lift slowed to a stop, and the doors opened. Kane stepped out, the faintest hint of a smile playing on his lips. He wasn't just a man, he was a force, and the galaxy would learn that the hard way. The Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council was alive with chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices a cacophony of accusations, denials, and fear. Holographic displays flickered, showing images of the mercenaries Kane had incapacitated, their unconscious forms a stark reminder of the violence that had unfolded on the supposedly neutral station. XR Kravix stood at the center of the chamber, his spines flaring in mock indignation. "This is an outrage. Humanity's representative has desecrated the sanctity of this council with barbaric violence. Is this the behavior of a species that claims to value diplomacy?" The room erupted into murmurs, some delegates nodding in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. The accusation had weight, Violence within the council's domain was a grave offense. Adrian Kane stood calmly at the edge of the assembly floor, his expression unflinching as dozens of alien eyes bore into him. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, and the room quieted as he began to speak. "Barbaric violence?" he said, his voice steady and cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let's discuss that, shall we?" He gestured toward the holographic images still flickering above the assembly. Those mercenaries weren't on a diplomatic mission, Exarch. They weren't here to exchange pleasantries or negotiate treaties. They were sent to kill me. The statement hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Kravix's spines bristled, but he said nothing, his predator's eyes narrowing as he studied Kane. "If I may," Kane continued, his tone sharpening, "I find it curious that an attack on a diplomat, a blatant violation of council law, occurred just hours after the Exarch publicly questioned humanity's place here. Curious timing, don't you think?" The murmurs grew louder, some delegates glancing at Kravix with suspicion. The Exarch snarled, his voice a growl that silenced the room. "You have no proof," he spat. "Your accusations are baseless, human. And even if they weren't, your response was excessive. You could have subdued them without such brutality." Kane's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "Excessive? Perhaps. But when your life is on the line, you don't take half measures. You, of all people, should understand that Exarch." Kravix took a step forward, his claws flexing. "Are you threatening me, Kane?" The tension in the room was palpable, and the silence stretched as the two locked eyes. Then Kane spoke, his voice calm, but filled with an undercurrent of steel. "No," he said, "I don't make threats. I deal in truths. And the truth is, humanity will not be intimidated. Not by you, not by your hired killers, and not by anyone else in this chamber who thinks we don't belong here." He turned to address the rest of the assembly, his voice rising to fill the cavernous space. "We came here in good faith, seeking collaboration and understanding. But if you think humanity will cower in the face of aggression, you're mistaken. We've faced extinction before, on our own world, in our own history. And we've survived. We've thrived. So understand this. We're here to stay." The room fell into a stunned silence, the weight of Kane's words hanging heavily in the air. For a moment, no one spoke, the delegates exchanging uneasy glances. Then a soft, deliberate clapping broke the silence. It came from a corner of the chamber, where the Andarian delegate, an elder statesman with silver-blue skin and piercing violet eyes, sat. He rose slowly, his applause echoing through the room. "Well said, Representative Kane," the Andarian intoned, his voice smooth and melodic. "It seems humanity's resilience is matched only by its eloquence." Others began to murmur in agreement, though not all were convinced. Kravix, however, was seething. He had underestimated Kane, and now the human had turned the tide of opinion against him. But Kravix wasn't finished. He straightened, his spines quivering with barely contained rage. "You speak of resilience, human, but words mean little in the face of action. If humanity truly seeks to prove its worth, let it do so in the arena of diplomacy, not through violence." Kane met his gaze, unflinching. "And yet, Exarch, it was violence that you chose when you sent those assassins. Hypocrisy doesn't suit you." The chamber buzzed with renewed whispers, the delegates torn between disbelief and curiosity. Kane had deftly maneuvered the situation, but the Exarch was a wily opponent, and his influence ran deep. Later, in the privacy of his quarters, Kane leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. The confrontation in the council chamber had been a victory, but it was far from the endgame. Kravix was dangerous, not just because of his ambition, but because of the power he wielded behind the scenes. A secure message chimed on his terminal, and Kane opened it. The familiar voice of his handler greeted him, calm and composed. "You handled yourself well today," she said. "But Kravix won't back down. He's already moving pieces on the board." "I know," Kane replied, his tone grim. "He's desperate now. Desperation makes people reckless." "True," the handler agreed. "But don't underestimate him. He's got allies, and they'll come for you next. The question is, are you ready?" Kane allowed himself a small, humorless smile. Always. The line went dead, and Kane stared at the screen, his mind already working through scenarios. He didn't need to wait for Kravix's next move. He was going to make one of his own. In the depths of the station, Kravix met with his most trusted advisors in a darkened chamber. Holograms flickered to life around them, displaying schematics, dossiers, and tactical plans. "The human is a problem," Kravix snarled, his claws tapping against the table. "He's more dangerous than I anticipated." One of his advisors, a wiry creature with translucent skin, leaned forward. "Perhaps it's time to escalate. If the council won't act, we can force their hand. A crisis, something they can't ignore." Kravix's eyes gleamed with malice. "Yes, a crisis. Something that will expose the humans for what they truly are: dangerous, uncontrollable, unworthy of the council's trust." As the plans unfolded, the room seemed to darken, the weight of their intentions palpable. But Adrian Kane was already a step ahead. In his quarters, he reviewed intercepted communications, his eyes narrowing as the pieces of Kravix's plan came together. "They're going to push," he muttered to himself. "Force us into a corner." He leaned back, his mind racing. The galaxy was a game of strategy, and Kravix had just overplayed his hand. Kane wasn't just a diplomat. He was a predator, and predators didn't wait to be cornered. They struck first. The storm was coming, and this time, Kane would make sure humanity emerged stronger than ever. The stench of ozone and scorched metal hung thick in the air as Kane made his way through the war-torn corridors of the council station. Emergency lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced across walls riddled with scorch marks. The aftermath of the failed bomb plot had left chaos in its wake, and yet Kane moved with quiet purpose, his steps unhurried. He wasn't just a man anymore. To those who had witnessed his resolve, he had become something else, an avatar of vengeance cloaked in humanity's defiance. The station's central command was in shambles when he arrived. Technicians scrambled to restore power, their faces pale and drawn. The remaining council members huddled in tense clusters, whispering in urgent tones. All fell silent as Kane stepped into the room, his presence commanding. Even the bravest among them couldn't help but avert their eyes from the intensity of his gaze. He approached the central dais, where the holographic projection of the station's status flickered. Standing there, flanked by a contingent of loyal security personnel, was Exar Kravix. His once imposing frame now seemed smaller, his spines drooping under the weight of exposure and failure. But Kane knew better than to mistake Kravix's diminished posture for defeat. The Exarch was cornered, and nothing was more dangerous than a predator with no way out. "You've overplayed your hand, Exarch," Kane said, his voice low and steady, yet carrying an edge that made the air around him feel heavier. "The council knows what you've done. Your fleet won't save you now." Kravix's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a snarl. "You think this is over, human? You think your pathetic species has won? This is merely a setback. The galaxy is vast, and there are far greater forces at play than you could ever comprehend." Kane stepped closer, his expression cold and unyielding. "Maybe, but you won't be a part of those forces. Not anymore." Before Kravix could respond, the station speakers crackled to life. A synthesized voice announced the arrival of an unknown vessel, its trajectory locked onto the council station. The room tensed as the holographic display updated to show the intruder. A sleek, black ship, its hull bristling with weaponry that gleamed ominously in the faint starlight. Kane's earpiece buzzed, and his handler's voice came through. "Adrian, that ship isn't broadcasting any identification codes. Scanners can't penetrate its hull. Whatever's on board, it's nothing good." "I figured as much," Kane replied, his eyes never leaving the projection. The room erupted into chaos once more as council members argued over what to do. Kravix, however, remained unervingly calm, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Kane didn't miss it. "This was your contingency, wasn't it?" he said, his tone accusatory. "You knew you'd be exposed, so you called in reinforcements." Kravix chuckled, a deep, guttural sound that echoed in the chamber. "You think too small, human. That ship isn't here for me. It's here for you. Kane's jaw tightened, but he didn't let the Exarch see any hint of unease. Instead, he turned to the nearest security officer. Prepare the station's defenses. I want every gun we've got aimed at that ship. The officer hesitated, glancing at the council members. Kane's voice hardened. Now! The officer snapped to attention and relayed the order. The station's automated turrets hummed to life, tracking the incoming vessel as it slowed to a halt just beyond firing range. The tension was palpable, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, without warning, the ship's comms activated. A distorted voice filled the chamber, its tone metallic and cold. Adrian Kane, step outside. Alone. A murmur rippled through the room. Kane frowned, his mind racing. Whoever was on that ship knew his name, knew his reputation. And yet, they were foolish enough to challenge him directly. Ignore them, one of the council members urged. We can't let you risk yourself. Kane shook his head. This isn't about me. It's about sending a message. They want a show of force? I'll give them one. Before anyone could stop him, he turned and left the chamber, heading toward the station's main airlock. As he walked, his handler's voice buzzed in his ear again. Adrian, this is suicide. You don't know what's waiting for you out there. I don't need to, Kane replied. They called for me. That means they're afraid. The airlock hissed open, revealing the vast emptiness of space beyond the station's force field. The alien ship loomed ahead, its sleek design both beautiful and menacing. Kane stepped forward, his posture relaxed, as if he were walking into a negotiation rather than a potential execution. A beam of light engulfed him, and he was suddenly aboard the alien vessel. The interior was stark and featureless, its walls a seamless blend of black and silver. At the center of the room stood a figure clad in dark armor, its face obscured by a smooth, reflective visor. Adrian Kane, the figure said, its voice no longer distorted but calm, almost human. You're everything they said you'd be. And you are? Kane asked, his tone nonchalant. The figure tilted its head slightly. A warning. Humanity has drawn too much attention. You've made enemies you cannot hope to defeat. Kane smirked. Funny. That's what they all say. The figure raised a hand, and the walls of the room shifted, revealing holographic projections of battles across the galaxy. Entire planets reduced to rubble, fleets annihilated in flashes of light. The figure gestured to the carnage. This is what awaits you. Stand down now, and perhaps your species will be spared. Kane's expression darkened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. You think humanity will kneel because of a few scare tactics? You don't know us at all. We don't break. We endure. And when we're pushed to the brink, we push back. Harder than anyone expects. The figure seemed to study him, its visor reflecting his determined gaze. Then you leave us no choice. The room erupted into motion. Panels slid open, revealing automated turrets that swiveled to target Kane. He moved like a shadow, faster than the machines could track. Using the environment to his advantage, he dismantled the turrets one by one, his movements precise and deadly. As the last turret fell, the figure stepped forward, its armor crackling with energy. Kane braced himself, but before either of them could strike, the ship shuddered violently. An explosion rocked the vessel, and alarms blared. That's my cue, Kane said, a grim smile on his lips. He launched himself at the figure, their clash brief but brutal. Kane's years of training and adaptability gave him the edge, and within moments, his opponent lay defeated, their visor cracked to reveal an alien face twisted in pain and fear. This is humanity, Kane said, leaning in close. Remember that. He activated the ship's transporter and was back aboard the station moments before the alien vessel exploded in a fiery blaze. As the station's defenses stood down, Kane returned to the council chamber, his presence heavier than ever. What now? A council member asked, their voice trembling. Kane's gaze swept the room. Now we prepare. Because this was just the beginning,